You got squad. Okay, we're going to get started in just a second here. I know we just opened the doors. Everyone's kind of still running around, but I want to make sure that this gets kicked off and stays on track today. All right. I just realized that. All right. That looks like a good quorum. Let's get started. Welcome to VMware Explorer 2024 Las Vegas. My name's Mike McLaughlin. You're in the community theater. This is a quick talk, so we're going to be done in about 10 minutes, actually about 20. But today we're going to kick off the session with a conversation about disasters, actually disaster recovery. All right. And I know this is probably important to most of you because you run your company's businesses and you don't want to get taken down with some sort of disaster, whether it be a site disaster or a cyber attack. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the context of business critical applications and basically VCF workloads. So with that, let's jump in. We'll give you about 10 seconds to read our disclaimer slide. I believe this is being broadcast, so. Okay, good. Serious stuff, but I'm not going to read it to you. Two things I want to talk about today, this morning, all right, is the difference between site and cyber disasters. We've been dealing with this for years, and this is a topic that's near and dear to me. I'll be talking about it all week, but there are two different kinds of things here, and they affect your organizations and your planning and preparation differently. All right, and given that, we're going to split that apart, and then we're going to look at the aspect of protecting your sites and recovering your sites in the event of either of these. So let's jump in. I'm assuming you're here because you've virtualized many of your applications. What we want to do is establish now a foundation for those, not only when they're running in production, but when something happens and we need to recover those. Basic terminology you're probably familiar with, but I like to use this because this will be some of the decision criteria that you'll need to apply when picking the right solution, when applying the right techniques, when dealing with continuity in your business. Is recovery points are to the left and recovery time is to the right. Recovery points is how far back do I have to go to get back into service, and to the right is how fast can that happen. And this will make a difference when you're looking at business continuity, DR failover, and ransomware recovery, because those endpoints will be constantly shifting. And you'll want to have these conversations within yourself, your team, your business partners, the application owners, is what are we designing for? What can we pay for? Because that's also very critical. These are business economic decisions. Now, with the VMware products, VMware Live Recovery, introduced earlier this year, hopefully everyone's gotten through the general confusion of renaming a product in the midst of its life, all right? But it is essentially the umbrella for dealing with disasters, all right? And there are these two kinds, disaster recovery and ransomware recovery, or a site disaster and a cyber attack. They are different. I'm going to start to separate these two problems a little bit right now as we move forward. With a disaster recovery solution, you typically have one site and something happens that site's no longer available, whether it's a man-made problem like a power situation or Mother Nature striking. But what you want to basically do is fail your business operations over to another site and get back up and running as quickly as possible. That's a whole different problem than if you have an internal cyber attack. Typically the site is still intact, but the contents now have been compromised. You don't just pick up because you've been malware attacked and run to another city and start running, because you're probably going to take all of that with you. What you want to do is fix that problem in place, if possible. You've got your data center. Hopefully they haven't turned off the power or crushed the building or fired all the employees or whatever. You still have your infrastructure, but the things inside are now impacted, and they're two different problems. So let's peel this back a little bit further. If you look at these two types of recovery and you think about your applications, having a secondary site is really critical if you need to be back up and running relatively quickly and can't build that second site. And you want your business to basically shift across town, across state, across countries, whatever, and resume operations. you're going to treat the planning and preparation and all of the testing differently for that type of disaster avoidance and disaster recovery. You're going to have possibly similar sites on both sides, all right? And you're going to be failing back and forth in testing because you want to resume operations as quickly as possible. In the event of a cyber attack, your application, something inside your organization is compromised. And I like to use the hospital analogy here, if you don't mind for just a moment, is your applications have gotten very sick and you want to heal them, you want to repair them, remediate them, validate, verify them, use whatever term you want. You're typically going to want to take them out of their operational environment, inspect them, validate them, clean them up, get them ready to go back to work, and put them back in a safe environment. All right, so it's a little bit different problem for planning, preparation, testing, and even the final operations. And this is, you can look at the details behind it. There's a little blog connection on TechZone there. If you want to follow that later, that's great. But this is essentially one of the key problems of dealing with any kind of disaster that strikes your infrastructure. So VMware Live Recovery has taken the two core existing products. Site Recovery Manager, if you've been around longer than 7 months with VMware, you'll know that that was a product. Yeah, Site Recovery Manager has been around for years, and so was VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, two key technologies used for solving slightly different problems. All right, we brought those together under one umbrella. Now they aren't a single product yet. You'll see that, but everybody take a note. Listen to the announcements this week. Pay attention to everything that I can't tell you today, because tomorrow is the opening keynote. All right, but what we're doing is bringing those together under a common centralized infrastructure so that you can manage and administer protected virtual machines as the core thing. So now what we're saying is protect your virtual machines, either for site or cyber recovery. All right, and the dashboard here lets you kind of work through the setup, the management of your licenses, the management of multiple sites. Most organizations we're dealing with today do not run a single vCenter. They are running multiple sites, multiple installations, multiple workload domains, and we need to be able to find continuity and understand how those look in the landscape of recovery and leverage, all right? And we're going to do that essentially through a unified dashboard, a centralized management point to manage these two technologies as they begin to move closer and closer to a single solution. All right, so these are the two solutions. I'm going to touch on these briefly in the next couple of minutes. If you're familiar with them, this should be a little bit of a review. If not, what I want you to see, though, is the similarity of the structure of these two products, but then we're going to split them apart in how they're used. So they basically all start in a vCenter environment. That's where your VMs live. They're living on some storage, they're running on some vSphere, and they're managed in a vCenter. The virtual machines, your applications run on top of that. We basically want to help you get the infrastructure solid so that we can build that up. And if we see here a protected and recovery site, we're going to basically put in, this one is VMware Live Site Recovery. We layer that in. We're going to layer in the replication here. Now, there are multiple ways of moving the data from A to B, and B to A, and A to B, and B to A. All right, we're going to use vSphere replication for our example today. You could do this with array storage base. You'll soon be able to do it with some other technology that you'll hear about later this week, which is really cool. But on top of that, we can plug in and use storage-based replication if you want. But you're basically building your two sites kind of as mirrors of each other. You want to basically be able to go A to B, B to A, maybe cross-directional, but that's going to give you your site disaster recovery capability. Your applications live on top of that, and they run either at one site or the other. In some cases, we have customers running applications that actually span and stretch both sites. That gets really complicated. We can't do that in a quick talk. All right. If we look at the cyber recovery piece, it looks very similar. It builds on your vSphere environment, your storage environment. Notice the right-hand side here, though. This is going to be one distinct difference that you'll see for the next several months. Is remember the hospital analogy. I talked about going and taking the patient and getting the VM healthy. Well, where do you do that in a cyber situation? You need a clean room. You need an isolated recovery environment. You need some place to take that infected virtual machine, that impacted virtual machine, out of the population and work on it. We're going to leverage VMware Cloud on AWS to do that. We're using the cloud-based capability. mainly for the recovery, not to run your business, but to run that virtual machine to health. All right, so think of this as the ICU at the hospital. You're not going to work in there. The doctors are going to come in, they're going to isolate you off, but as soon as you're healthy, you get your discharge papers and you go back to work. All right, that's this model here. You're not working in the cloud, you're healing in the cloud. And we're going to do that by basically building an infrastructure that lets me move my workload there and run it so that I can run through the mechanisms. So these are built on similar premises. Production site, recovery site, we're going to connect these together with live recovery mechanisms. All right, we're going to build the notion of protection groups. All right, protection groups are the collection of virtual machines that belong together. All right, nobody runs a single vCenter, nobody runs a single VM. All right, multiple VMs have to be collected together, so when I move an application over, I have all the pieces that I need for it. All right, so protection groups are going to be really important. We need to tie these two sites together because if I'm going to fail over and get right into production, I need to have all my networking and all my resources in place. If I'm going to fail over into an isolated environment, I want to have enough infrastructure there so that I can mimic a real workload, so that I can put that virtual machine on the treadmill, so to speak, and make sure it's healthy. I've never seen a treadmill in the ICU, but it's probably not a bad idea. They usually send you down to level 2 for that. And then ultimately, the recovery plans are the key part here. These are the automated, documented workflows of what goes from A to B and back. All right, and the recovery plans are encoded inside of the VMware Live Recovery solutions. And these are the things that we're going to help you automate through testing and actual use. All right, and so this structure here is built in both of these tools. A little bit differently, we'll talk about that later this week in my tutorial, but the idea is you've got this framework for building a site recovery capability so that your applications can run. All right, so just a little bit of a verbiage for those that don't like pictures. All right, basically protection groups, mappings, recovery plans, and often infrequent testing. Because if you don't test these things and crisis hits, that's a bad time to start testing. All right, and both of these solutions, all of this infrastructure allows you to move that back and forth and get familiar with the processes of failing over and bringing applications online, of failing over and investigating malware attacks. It's okay to fail over a healthy machine and look at it. I go to my doctor regularly. Nothing's wrong with me. Annual checkup. He gives me a full work done. He's like, okay, you're good, go back. All right, I don't have to get checked in. Those kinds of things are very important in your business operations. All right, let's talk a little bit about the protection groups and a couple pieces here just graphically. I mentioned these are things we want to group together. All right, both of these solutions, this whole infrastructure is built on this, building the protection groups. Now from your application perspective, whether they're tier 1, tier 2, how they're organized, you're going to need to sit down either with your team or with our professional services, kind of work through this. There are no best practices here that I can just like give you right now and take away. But it really is understand your business and group things that need to be together when you need to work on them. All right, we'll schedule those with the appropriate retention. Remember the RPO? How often do I want to take these backups? How long do I want to keep them? What do I want to do with them? Again, there's a cost for some of this, but we'll figure that out. And just basically schedule that all in so that you have the proper safety net of recovery points when disaster comes. The next thing is those recovery plans. And this is a kind of a graphical notation of what's in a recovery plan. Well, there's typically going to be some kind of scope. What's the recovery plan cover? You can have multiple recovery plans. They can work on multiple things. That's okay. So there's going to be a scope. There's going to be some kind of mapping from A to B in that recovery plan. This VM is going to run here. If I need to fail it over, it's going to run there. This resource, this network, this folder, this basic mapping. All right. There'll be some customizations in these recovery plans because you don't just pluck it out and drop it over there and let it run. Sometimes you have to change the IP address, move some things around, change how it's powered on, maybe instrument it with some tools, don't know. But there's going to be customizations capable, and then ultimately the steps involved. All right, the sequence of recovery. Do this first, this next, this next. In a site disaster recovery, that's really critical. It's very much like a run book. All right, Site A is down, site B, here's how it comes up. Step 1, step 2, step 3. All right, if it's a ransomware recovery or a cyber recovery, you might look at the steps a little bit differently. It'll give you some indication of what the critical applications first are, but you're gonna have to basically, like, you can't necessarily bring an application back if its predecessor isn't healthy. There's just a number of things, so the steps are critical. And then obviously, if we're tweaking this recovery plan for site or cyber recovery, this will all be encoded in this logical structure that we can then keep online, share with our colleagues, run through regular testing, feel much better should a disaster occur. All right. So we talked about this a little bit. I just want to put this in context of a VCF environment. It's kind of one of the key talks this week. If you think about a VCF environment as being multiple workload domains and virtual machines and hardware and whatnot, if you have a disaster, one is you need another site. Now I've drawn a network isolation in there because in some cases that other site starts off completely isolated. It's not talking to the original site. The original site might be down or it might be infected. But think of this as just another workload domain where I can run my applications. Makes sense to me. I'm going to have snapshots and replication feeding that environment so that I have something to bring back online. Now, in the case of a cyber attack, the last good backup might not be adequate. I might want to have a deeper inventory and maybe some metrics that I'm looking at on those recovery points so that I can basically pick and choose. And the analogy I use is like, how did you feel last Friday? Oh, not so good. How about Thursday? How was Wednesday? Wednesday's a good day to start. Let's take your Wednesday health and fix you to Monday. All right. You want to basically have recovery points to work from. If I just say go over there and work, you take everything and go. It's a little different scenario. So we want that. Now, for a disaster recovery, a site disaster, we've got our run book. We've got step 1, step 2, step 3. We can just open that up and let the tool open that up and start running through it. For a cyber recovery, we want a little bit more of a, I'll say a science project, all right? Because we're not exactly sure where the impact is, how to get it out, how to get everything tied together. This guided workflow goes through a validation and staging loop for me so that I can bring some sanity to the chaos. Because if I've got 10 or 100 virtual machines and I don't know exactly what state they're in, when they were best healthy, and I've got to iterate through that, I'm going to want some control over that. That guided workflow is going to help with that. At the end of the day, I might also need some additional tools. All right, I might want to put some of the new next-gen antivirus tools in there and really investigate what's going on inside those virtual machines. As I bring those into that environment to inspect them and work them through a recovery process, one of the key things for a cyber recovery is also isolation. We want to be able to cordon off each application so that it can't escape just yet. All right, starting up a virtual machine, the first thing it might do is try to access an IP address you do not want it to talk to. Or it might sit dormant for a while until the internet gets open. You want that behavioral analysis is critical, and isolating that, again, that needs to be in a bubble, just like in the ICU, all right? So we're working through this. So for a cyber recovery, it is a little bit different. We've got some additional things we have to layer in. This is what we're working on using the VMware Live Cyber Recovery and some future things that you'll hear about later this week. But if you think about a cyber recovery solution for VCF, it probably looks something like this, all right? I'm going to just skip through this a little bit. It's just a different graphical representation of the same thing, but we're basically using VMware Cloud on AWS as that extra workload domain right now because it's easy for us to manage that and all aspects of it, all of the networking and component aspects, even the provisioning of new hardware, so that you can get this isolated recovery environment very quickly and at hand just in time to do the remediation. We're not expecting you to run your business in there. We're expecting you to clean your virtual machines in that isolated recovery environment. Okay. A couple of things that were announced recently. I just want to bring these in because we're talking about protection and recovery. vSAN data protection. For vSAN ESA, some really nice new features. So the online snapshot capabilities that are built into the vSAN architecture can now be leveraged with the cyber recovery solution as well. So we're tying those two products together. There'll be some demonstrations of that in the expo and possibly in some sessions and some conversations about where that's going. But the underlying storage inside of the VCF environment is getting its enhancements further integrated into the layers for protection and recovery. There's whole sessions on just this topic this week. I suggest if this is interesting, go look those up. But I just wanted to bring that in because data protection and recovery are slightly two different things. We're protecting locally, so remember business continuity and HA and things. You might be able to solve the problem locally if it's contained quick enough. If you've got to get off site because the site is down or because the disaster requires remediation through cyber mechanisms, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to use a different mechanism to get the data there. Then the last thing I want to leave, and we got just a minute to do this. So 3 things. For disaster recovery and cyber recovery, VMware Live Recovery is what it's called now. So if you're ask people about VMware Live Recovery, it is the common family for both of these solutions. Those 2 solutions are site recovery and cyber recovery because they are slightly different problems. And from an architecture and implementation perspective, there's 3 things you got to think about. So one is, at the application level, that's your expertise, or at least the teams you're working with. Make sure you know how to validate the application is operating correctly, what needs to be grouped together, think protection groups and organization and sequence of steps. At the VM level, I would say count on us for the orchestration and the management between the sites. So if you want to get a VM running here or here, the VMware layer below that, the vCenter, vSphere, and vSAN capabilities and storage below that, that's what we're dealing with. And then finally, we're going to tie back to that SLA slide, is there are a lot of ways to get data from A to B, all right? vSphere replication, storage replication, there's even some other third-party mechanisms. Figure out at the data level what you need to meet the business needs for either business continuity, disaster recovery, or cyber recovery, because they will be slightly different, and you might need some other tools that will be application specific. There are presentations on managing SQL Server and Oracle databases and multi-tier web apps. All of those things are very critical. They tie into that top layer. So live recovery, 2 types of use cases, 3 layers of concern for application business continuity in your environment. All right? It's all under VMware Live Recovery. I hope this was helpful. There's a lot of stuff going on this week. Take notes, pay attention, enjoy yourselves. Welcome.